Well, is there a smooth transition to the smooth operator, Sade?
This is a smooth week in general, I would say, for
Yeah,
music.
I would agree with that. So before the episode, we were trying to figure out what we were going to have in it, but I believe that I agreed to Jezebel in the montage, which you would have heard by now. And now you're going to hear a little bit of the sweetest taboo. Can we sing like Sade? I did okay there, right? Like, she has such a distinctive voice.
Yeah.
I thought she was on the podcast for a second.
Yeah, hey, thank you, Matt. I appreciate that fake praise, but I'll take it. So.
Sade is still alive, I think. Yes,
She is.
I hope.
Yes, she is still alive.
Grim Reaper Josh over here hasn't killed her off yet, so.
For the first time ever, Matt, I'm going to remember to throw to you for the numbers. Yep.
There we go. All right, so Sade's Promise comes in at number 494 in the 1980s on Best Ever Albums, number 41 in 1985, number 3,186 of overall rankings. It is Sade's third highest album on Best Ever Albums, behind 1984's Diamond Life and 1992's Love Deluxe. And she's not on Rolling Stone's list. Actually, none of the albums tonight are on Rolling Stone's list. And Sade comes in at number 435 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums.
Gotcha. Well, this is our second coverage of Sade on the podcast. You can check out an earlier review a couple weeks ago where we delved in a little bit. So one thing here that I did not know, and I'll do, did you know Sade is like Schrodinger's cat in that it's both her and the band, right? So she's kind of in both hands. I did not know that the band was also known as Sade. I just thought it was a singer who just had accompaniment, right? That was kind of
like Van Halen?
Not as much, because there's
Van Halen was the guy, but it was also the band.
It's like a gestalt.
Or Bon Jovi.
Yeah, Bon Jovi. Yeah, I mean, but it's weird because that's like one
last
number,
names.
You know what I mean? Yeah, and so this is just, it's both the person and the band. So I did not realize that.
Yeah.
I did, however, realize that Sade was born in Nigeria, but brought up in Essex, England, from the age of 4. So she went to art school in London, and before becoming a musician, was sort of recognized as both a fashion designer and a model, before sort of saying, I'm going to go ahead and join the band Pride. Actually, the story there of those different things, who do you think I'll just throw this out to you. Who do you think I thought of that had kind of a similar thing where it was like model, fashion person from an early age, and then kind of got into music? I immediately kind of connected this, but can you guys think anybody from the Wayback Machine? The Wayback Machine in our 60s. Yes, very similar to Nico is kind of the thing where she was in the world of fashion and then decided to kind of pursue musical interests. Very different voices, obviously, but both strong, independent women as well. So, yeah, so good job, Matt. That was who I thought of as well. So, a little bit there. The middle name of Sade is Helen Falashade Adu. So that is where the Sade comes from. And the middle name of Falusade means honor earns the crown. So her father was a Nigerian lecturer of economics, which I found very interesting. And her mother was a nurse. They met in London, married, and moved to Nigeria. So they actually went from London to Nigeria. But then her parents separated when she was 4, and her mother, who was the English citizen originally, moved back to England, and Sade and her older brother, Banji, or Banjai. I actually have to admit that I did not look at that, so I apologize if it is Banjai, but probably Jai, because Nigerian names tend to go more Jai than G, right? We'll see. But anyway, she has an older brother. They moved to Holland on Sea, Essex, and then she went to art school, as we mentioned, and she studied fashion design at St. Martin's School of Art, completed that program, and then began singing with a band by the name of Pride. I think what's most important here is that she formed a songwriting partnership with a gentleman by the name of Stuart Matthewman, and they began doing their own sets. One of the songs in this set was the song Smooth Operator, which got the attention of record companies. And eventually Sade and Matthewman split from the group Pride. and along with the keyboardist Andrew Hale, the drummer Paul Cook, and the bassist Paul Denman, combined to form the band Sade. So I imagine it's kind of like what like No Doubt must have been thinking when they had like Gwen Stefani or something, where it's like we have this like very or Blondie, right? You know, kind of has the same cons. Maybe Blondie might even be a better thing, where it's like, okay, we have this very photogenic person, we've got musicians behind it, but we're gonna kind of go all in, right? With, you know what I mean, like centering it around this charismatic presence with obviously a completely distinctive voice. But when I was reading that, kind of there seemed to be a little bit of a awareness of that with the people around, like we're destined to be sort of like the background folks, but that's okay. So they perform their first show at the Heaven nightclub in London, and it actually I read this on multiple places, but it was so popular that like an incredibly large amount of people were turned away at the door. I think a lot of times it's about 1,000 is normally what's credited as the amount of people there. And then they end up in the US in late 1983. And then eventually, interestingly enough, she signed with Epic Records first in October of 1983. And then the rest of the band signed in 1984, which I found to be very interesting. So I went looking for it a little bit, and it seems like Epic was kind of looking at her as a solo artist, right? But then somewhere along the line, I don't know if she advocated for the band to come with her, or if they kind of viewed it as a little bit more the partnership. Obviously, because Matthew Mann was writing songs, I think maybe there was an element of that too, that, you know, some of that was there. But that leads to the band recording the album Diamond Life, which we covered, that was recorded at the Power Plant in London. And it was released on July 16th, 1984, and reached number 2 on the UK album charts, selling 1.2 million copies and winning the Brit Award for Best British Album in 1985. The album also was a large hit internationally, across Europe and across the world, including being a top 10 album in the US. And, you know, British crossover, some did and some didn't, right? Well, this was one that did. It did sell over 4 million copies in the United States, and it has international sales of over 6 million copies, making it one of the top-selling debut albums of the 80s and the best-selling debut ever by a British female vocalist. So they continue along, releasing singles, and then that eventually leads us to our album Tonight, which was the album Promise, their second album, which was released in the year 1985. Before we cover it a little bit, a couple pieces of information that might be helpful on this. They are working with the same team of producers that they worked with on their debut album. Some names that were included are Ben Rogan, Robin Millar, and Mike Pella. The album's title comes from a letter from Sade's father, where he refers to the promise of hope to recover from the cancer that he was battling. So there was a context for the album title as well. The sort of the recording of it, there was not obviously this album was extremely successful. Let me start by saying that. It was close to equally as successful as the debut album. It was pretty well regarded critically. It did reach number 1 in the U.S. Billboard 200, so it did improve upon the top 200 showing of their debut album, and it had sold 1 million copies by September of 1988. Since then, it has sold in excess of 4 million copies. One thing about Sade's albums you find is they continue to sell throughout the CD era, which I found to be very interesting. It's just like people were always sort of stumbling on to them, you know what I mean? And then buying the album, which you can't say about everybody, you know, but
Sade is timeless.
It's, yeah, that's a grower, I guess would be what I would say. And there's always people that this album refers to. I shouldn't say refers is the wrong word. This album appeals to would probably be the best way. Yeah, that's what I was going for right there. As I said before, it was relatively well received. There were some notable examples, you know what I mean, of critics that didn't love it, but for the most part, It's another one of those albums that retrospectively has gotten more well regarded than maybe it was at the time, but it certainly wasn't critically panned at the time, I
Yeah.
guess would be the best way to put it. Um, I guess the other thing I would say about this album was that the album spawned two singles, Never As Good As the First Time and The Sweetest Taboo. They both reached the US Top 100 and stayed on there for over 6 months. Sweetest Taboo got as high as number 5 on the Hot 100. So depending on what month you pick, Josh, it could have very well been, in Matt and John Sang the Hits. So one thing that will appeal to you, Josh, is shortly after this album was made, Sade made her acting debut in a film that was considered to be a pretty infamous film, I guess, in Great Britain, based on a 1950s novel, Absolute Beginners. Are you familiar with that film?
I am not.
It is quite an interesting read. It is actually blamed for the collapse of an entire British film studio called Goldcrest Films. How I was familiar with it was the Bowie song "Absolute Beginners,"
Oh,
which
yeah,
was
he's in it.
Yep, which was the lead track, which I was familiar with. I was not aware that it was tied to a movie or a book, for that matter. But apparently, it was a book that was sort of well regarded and very British, right? Like about a guy in Britain and sort of, the life and times of what was happening. There was an element of sort of progressivism in it as well. But yeah, it then became a movie. The names I recognize, like Patsy Kensit was in it, and Bowie was in it, and yes, Sade was also in this film. But yeah, it was quite the interesting read, because it looked like the type of movie that would have been a very interesting like retrospective to look at, with like talking head piece, right, where people talked about working on it and stuff like that, because yeah, it was kind of viewed as as sort of an epic failure.
Ray Davies also is in the movie.
Yep. Yeah, it's yeah, I won't go into that because that could be a whole other segment, but yeah, that was her acting debut. So I can add a little bit more unique stuff about what happened afterwards and stuff like that, but that does kind of take us up to this album. Matt, why don't we start with you? Thoughts on Sade, and also like maybe the totality, right, now that you've heard two albums, what you think?
Yeah. Well, first I'd like to say I think that Josh has a new Josh's Movie Corner.
You want to watch Absolute Beginners?
I do, Josh.
That would be funny, yeah. So yes, my second run at Sade here. This album to me seems, if memory serves, this seems more jazzier than like this to me is this very jazz kind of influenced album that I think grew. I grew on a little bit over time, like, because initially I think I was a little bored, was an initial reaction that I had. I wasn't really doing too much for me. I don't know, maybe it wasn't the best.
On this album or
on this
Sade
album,
in
yeah.
general?
On
Okay.
this album,
Yeah.
like this seemed jazzier. The other one seemed a little bit more upbeat, maybe a little funkier. There's some funk moments on this, like particularly with like Never As Good As the First Time, which is a more upbeat, funk based song, which. That was a song that kind of stood out to me initially. Sweetest Taboo, I did know that was another. Oh yeah, I remember hearing that song on the radio, kind of deal, and so I think that this definitely benefited for me with repeated listens, and I think this definitely seems like an album. This is a good evening album. Like this is a good kind of like it's another one of those albums that seems like it's kind of coming from a nightclub. Late at night. It's very smooth. Like this is smooth is definitely. The quality of the production, which is pretty good. Lots of saxophone that's permeates throughout this,
Yep.
And yeah, it's just kind of like a jazzy nightclub. Like actually, the first song, "Is It a Crime?" actually starts off like you're kind of in a burlesque show of some sorts. You expect some lady to come out dancing, to this very dramatic kind of entrance song that "Is It a Crime?" starts off as. So yeah, I think I definitely like this more as time went on. It's not the genre that I typically gravitate towards, but I really do like her voice. I like, kind of the mellow aspects of a lot of the songs on here. Even though the ones that were a little bit more upbeat, I was I gravitated towards more when I first listened to it. Maureen's another good song. The final track's kind of more of an upbeat, kind of a good a way to close and stuff as well.
I mean, not lyrically, but yes.
Well, not lyrically, right? I mean, well, I'm not. When am I ever talking about lyrics, guy? I mean, and I was gonna mention, like, I could tell, obviously, like a song like "Tar Babies," that's a very depressing song. There's some very, there's some, what is it? "War of the Hearts" is a very depressing song. So there's definitely a mood to this. This feeling of there's a melancholy overtone to this, but I like that a lot. I like I like kind of like a sad, melancholy nature to the songs here. But I think this is definitely an album to listen to, when you're winding down or at night or whatever. You want to just have something that's sonically anyway, is at least kind of like this, I don't know, like a jazzy or kind of relaxing type sound. And if you want to go to lyrics, you're probably going to get a lot more into that, which I'm sure you guys can talk to. But I did like this. I don't know how often I would go back to this, but I definitely think that I could. And I don't think that this is for everybody. Obviously, this is if you're not really into a smoother, softer, jazzier type sound. If you need more energy, so to speak, you're probably going to want to go elsewhere. But if you're okay with kind of like a nice, I don't know, like a pensive sounding, somber sounding record, this is definitely a good place to go to. And I liked listening to it more. The repeated listenings definitely did it some favors for me. So I'll go slightly thumbs up here. I'm not like totally enthusiastic about it, but I think that there's plenty of elements here that are enjoyable. And so I would go with a slight thumbs up for me.
Yeah, I think that gets into the appeal that John was talking about. The way she sings, coupled with kind of the jazz nature of her music and arrangements. I think that can work in a lot of different settings, especially at night. Romantic, obviously, I think fits as well. And relaxing would be another emotion or vibe that you could put off on this. I like this album too. Also, the thing that stuck out to me this time, compared to the first one, Diamond Life, was that it seemed more complex lyrically. I think there's some growth with her in the band. I think that arrangements were more complex as well. And I kind of dialed in on the lyrics this time, or paid more attention to them. And I think they're, the emotions behind them are complex, as well as the lyrics are. So, I think there's a lot of conflicting emotions in some of these songs. Like you mentioned Tar Baby. I think that's true for that, and Maureen, and You're Not the Man. There's some sadness to them, but there's also, like you said, melancholy also, that bittersweet feelings, reminiscing, but also not always good memories necessarily. So I think that's throughout. I appreciated, she, in a song like Fear, she's singing in Spanish some as well. So I think that's adding an element to it. And but she's not just talking about love, which I felt like she was doing primarily on the first album. So I think she's expanding kind of what she's feeling or talking about in different situations. Love is still there, but maybe there's some different types of love that are discussed. So yeah, I think the album is pretty strong throughout. There's not really bad songs. Oh, another point that you made, Matt, there's an instrumental track on this, Punch Drunk, which is fits kind of the jazz nature, but you would think with, Sade being front and center, she would be singing on all of them. So she's giving space to her band as well. So that's interesting. That's kind of right in the middle. And I enjoyed a lot of these songs. I hadn't heard of any of them. I'm not sure if I knew Is It a Crime, which is kind of the most famous song on here. And
you didn't know Sweetest Taboo?
Yeah, Sweetest Taboo is the famous song on here.
I don't think I did. I didn't recognize it. So I think really I only knew Smooth Operator from the first album. But I think it was it's an album for like a certain feeling, or it's not going to work in every situation. And I'm definitely more of a high energy music listener if I'm going to listen to music, but I think it has its place, um and it's solid. So I'm also going to give it a thumbs up.
Yeah, I really like this album I actually felt it represented a real step up in sophistication of the music this time. I mean, always with Sade, it's gonna be mood setting, and as you said, Josh, it's more than almost any artist we've listened to. The appeal of Sade is so time and event specific. There are times where I would not want to listen to this, not because it's bad, but it just, as you said, it doesn't give me the energy I want, because the energy I'm looking for is sort of a relaxed, sort of romantic, playful type of approach. You know what I mean? Where to some degree she's not designed to be listened to hard and intensely, but that's not a knock. It's the reason is because the mood it sets is a very relaxed mood, and it can be just as much romantic as it is just sitting in your own space. And so there's times where it's like, this is really excellent music for doing some thinking of your own, or at a dinner at a certain time. It definitely, the vibe is warm weather. It's a weird listen cold weather, which we're in right now. It doesn't kind of match up with cold, right? It matches up with evening to me, or early morning, and it matches up with it's funny because it matches up with a very intimate mood, either with yourself in an intimate space or with a select other person or a couple people, right? It's not crowd music. It would be weird for me to go to a concert of Sade and like in the crowd, because I feel like everybody would be experiencing it personally. There's not like a communalness to me. It's a more personal music. Once again, not a knock, just the feel for me. You guys didn't mention some songs I really love on this. I love the song Jezebel. It gives the vibe of a Jezebel, right? Where you're wronged, and I just thought it was sonically a really cool track. It reminded me almost of like the singers from the 60s that we did. It had a little bit of a Nina Simone vibe to me, which I loved. I thought the song Fear was really good. It was almost a little bit like free jazzy at the end of it. It has a really cool bass line that thumps in the background, like boom, boom, like that just stands out. A lot of these songs actually had great bass lines. The sax and the bass are the two things that stand out, along with Sade's voice. And the drum just sort of stays in the back. There's a lot of hi-hat. It kind of fills in along the way. The song Maureen was another song I really enjoyed. It's a little bit more high energy for what Sade is. It comes in with those bongos. I loved it as an album closer. It was highly appealing to me. And then, the first three tracks, Is It a Crime, The Sweetest Taboo, and War of the Hearts, are the type of songs you could put on at like a dinner party, and they could just blend in and people would enjoy it. Very inoffensive music, but in the best way possible. It's also like romantic dinner music, I feel like, which is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Once again, these things could sound like cliches, but I just imagine going to like a nice little Caribbean getaway and having that music in the background, and just it signaling to me that I am on vacation and relaxed, and that the mood has changed, and that's a good thing. I can see why this music is so popular, because it's evergreen, kind of. You can put this on at any era, at any time, at any time, no matter what age, and it doesn't necessarily seem of the 80s. It could just as easily be playing right now. I also think it's music for older folks than younger folks. I think the older you get, the more this type of music appeals to you a little bit. I think it's even called like sophister rock, and the reason is because I just don't see like 17-year-olds putting this on. I think there's like a little bit of a, like, you have to have a little bit more life experience to understand why this music sets the tone for you. You know what I mean? And so like I do want to mention that I think if you're a younger listener of the show, your mileage may vary on this, but I get the feeling if you're like over 50, there's not going to be many people that are like, oh, I don't like her. You know what I mean? It's going to be like, oh, yes, that's a very appealing sound. And I think where I'm at in my life right now, straddling those two areas, I think I have grown into the music a little more than maybe the 18 or 19-year-old version of myself that might have been like, it's a little bit boring, you know? But it definitely is not now. I could see the nuance within the songs. And like I said, I appreciate that sometimes there were island sounds, there was different types of percussion, there was like hi-hat stuff, there was jazz percussion, there was like hand drumming type of sounds, the sax sometimes was long and wailing, sometimes was urgent, so I did like the variety of how the sax came in, and there were some really great bass lines on this, and the entire time Sade is sort of coming in to add a little bit of the finishing touches on it. She's like the how could I describe it? Like, what would you say she is? She's like the finishing touch. She's like the creme fraiche on the meal.
Cake?
No, it's just something that is
the truffles on it.
You don't get you don't get. Yeah, it's well, maybe not that niche, you know what I mean? Because she's an integral part. It's an integral part of it, but it's also not like icing on the cake, Matt, because that's too generic, and just there aren't a lot of people that sound like Sade. You know, she's got a very distinctive voice. So, yeah, I think it's just something that's an essential part of a meal, but also stands out as being somewhat exotic. I think that would be what I was going for. So, I'll have to think.
Yeah, it's definitely got like
a good thing. Yeah.
It definitely has a like a more of a mass appeal kind of thing, and it's almost reminding me a little bit of, it's kind of like good. I think we talked a little bit about this with Dire Straits' Brothers in Arms. You know, the adult contemporary.
Yes. But
like good adult. I think adult contemporary can fall into the vein of something.
This is a much stronger adult contemporary for me than that Brother in Arms.
Or almost like, or even like, I would probably say this is definitely more consistent than Brothers in Arms. I mean, well, Brothers in Arms also had more edge too. It's like, but when Brothers in Arms went adult contemporary,
but not a lot.
Well, no, it's yeah, right. One basically like maybe one song, but like, but when they went more though, like they leaned into the adult contemporary, I would say this is better. It still wasn't, to me, it wasn't as bad. I think I liked that more than you guys did, but or also kind of like just, this is good elevator music. Like this is good like music to kind of play. Like,
I think it's better than elevator music.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. But yes, but it's also something that could be played like in a hotel lobby or something like that. Yes. It's just it's easy. It's not harsh. It's very easy. It's smooth. It's good production. But it's good. It doesn't have to, just because you can play it in a hotel lobby or somewhere like that, doesn't mean it necessarily has to be bad, So so there's definitely some consistency here that is, and maturity. I think that's a good way of putting it as well. It's more of a mature sounding type.
It is like hotel bar music. That's a good place to where it would
But the lyrics aren't terrible like elevator music is. I wouldn't say they're like super high end, but they're not terrible, and there's some depth in some of the songs as well. There's definitely some "you've done me wrong" type stuff, but there's deeper context. And there's actually, she paints, the thing I like about Sade is she paints these stories, right, that you can put yourself into. Like Maureen is a story, and Mr. Wrong, and Jezebel, and The Sweetest Taboo, and you kind of you imagine who the protagonists and that was a big thing in like the 80s, right? Like I always think of like another song that's like, this is like Careless Whisper by Wham, right? Like it's like you're transported into this story that's almost like a little mini movie, right? And Sade is really good at like painting those little cinematic type of stories, right? Where you imagine like, who are these people? What do they look like? Where are they? Like. And they just seem like they'd be perfect for little music videos, right, along the way. You could just almost see like the shot of the guy leaving the hotel room, you know what I mean, or getting on a yacht or something and stuff like that. And it's very 80s, which is appealing to me. So, yeah. But I unlike some of the other stuff, like I absolutely could imagine myself in the right context saying, that album Promise by Sade, that's a good fit for this where I'm at, and I could absolutely see myself pulling this and referring to it, which moves it right into that category of recommend for me, because I could absolutely see myself pulling this, remembering it, and putting it into a context where it would be a choice, and that's what takes it.
Yeah.
That's for me what a recommend is. So
That's fair.
Nice.
Yeah.
whereas I can't imagine ever going to somebody, yeah, check out the deep cuts on that Brothers in Arms album. You
No,
know, it's
right.
just-
Yes.
Yeah, you know what I'm
Right.
saying?
I hear
So,
you. Yep. Quick cleaning of the stacks. Careless Whispers. George Michael. So
oh, it's not Wham.
Oh, yeah,
wow.
it is Wham featuring George Michael, I think.
Is that what it is?
Well, I was on the Billboard, one of the Billboard charts I looked at this week, and that was the that's how they labeled it. So
Yeah, I think it's
Okay.
still Wham, Matt.
That's
even
weird.
though Andrew Ridgely's not on it, but
All
that's
right.
more Sophistirock right there.
Sophistirock. Also, fun fact: my wife's coworker, who she's pretty good friends with,
is Sade.
no, that would be awesome.
By the way, you just said the W like Stewie and Family Guy right there. My wife's, yeah.
Oh, I did.
Continue though. Yes.
Well, my wife's that's more like Borat. Her coworker's husband was in a Sade cover band, which I
Ooh.
found fantastic. I'm like,
Wow.
What was the name
And
of
that
that
was-
band?
Sade? I don't know.
The sweetest taboo. It has to be,
Sweetest
right?
Taboo.
Like,
That's
yeah.
something
That's
like that.
actually, you know what? That's a good question. I have to find that out now. But
It's
yeah, I
always a
guess
reference to a song.
That's what I
of
was
a
gonna say.
band,
The
right, or
sweetest
something
taboo is
usually.
almost
not
the
when we
perfect
saw
name.
fake Iron Maiden. They were just Iron Maiden. Remember that?
Yes.
But yeah, so which I was surprised at when she first told me that. I was like, because before I listened to these albums, I'm like Sade, like that
Yeah.
was surprising. But like I could see that. I could see a band, somebody kind of playing this at a, I don't know, some sort of function or whatever. Like it's very easy listening, kind of good easy listening stuff. So yeah.
Nice.
Good. So definitely thumbs up for me. I enjoyed this album.
Yeah, I think we're all positive all around. I think you
think
were
so.
probably the most positive, John.
Everything. Go ahead, John.
I was gonna say I'd be curious just to hear a little bit more of what came down the road to see if there was continued. Like I said, there's a consistency with what the sound is, but it's not like they made the same album for the second album. There's definite differences, and I want to emphasize that because I think sometimes people think, oh, Sade, she sounds this way, right? Or in this case, the band sounds this way. But I saw a complete differentiation. I did not dislike the first album, but I felt like after a while, the runtime, the differentiation, right, kind of bled together, and it kind of felt like one track. I did not feel that way on this track, especially because by the end of the album, there were variations of the theme that were nice little surprises. So
She is consistent. I'm looking at the All Music discography, and the ratings across the board are very high for all of her albums. So she's clearly well liked and appreciated.
Yeah,
yeah,
and
we've only done two, but I would recommend both.
Are we going to do
But
the
this
one from
more.
the '90s? The other one, Love, whatever it is. It's
I don't
Love on
think
the
so.
Rocks
Love
at the
Deluxe.
Lights. Oh.
Yeah.
John, why
Darkest
what
House, yeah.
did this appear? Oh, by the way, did this appear on a list somewhere? Like
It did. I'll have to look at what list it was. I feel like
Okay.
it showed up on like it's either the Pitchfork list or the NME list. I can't remember
Got
which
it.
one, but it was definitely when we were looking to fill in some of the stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And Careless Whisper is on a Wham album. I googled it quick to be sure, and it said by George Michael. So then I saw a bunch of there's conflicting information on the internet, but yes, it is on their second and final album, Make It Big.
Quick cleaning of the stacks, Matt. Stop correcting me if you're wrong on stuff. Come on.
Yeah, I know. I
gotta
gotta stop
save
doing
those
that.
yeah.
I gotta
I'm
double check myself.
Right.
But
at
the
least
internet led me
23% of
astray.
the time.
Maybe George Michael wrote it, and that's why it says by George Michael.
No, the other guy, the Ridgely guy. Well, it's actually they're both co-writers on it. It's saying here, so
Complicated.
That
It
also
is.
has some sexy sax on that album.
it
too.
sure does.
Yeah.
And urgent vocals. So I think those are keys of Sophistirock. Urgent vocals, a love lost, and sax.
Sophistirock. That's awesome.
Sophistopop also.
Sophistopop, yes.
there
Sophistopop's probably a
Sophistafunk?
better term. No, I don't think so. I think you're like if you're gonna have a different type of funk, it's gonna be like dirty, dirty funk or like something like that. I don't think it goes this Sophista.
You can't have Sophistafunk.
No, it kind of just
You can have the
Yeah.
Renegades of Funk.
yeah. It doesn't have a lane really for that. If you go Sophistafunk, I think you're in a type of R&B at that point. I think so. Yeah. Okay. Well,
Right on.
That
Well,
ends.
I just
Sade's
realized it's all
Promise.
Brits this week too
Ah,
on our show.
Look at that.
across the pond. So
All
the
right.
right.
Brits had a presence in the '80s, especially on MTV. My God, they were killing it on MTV
Yeah.
in the early